welcome everybody to another week of HITRUST Secrets. Donna won't be here today. She's got another conflict, so she was not able to be here today, but I know we'll miss her and her insight into this. So before I kick it off with some of the questions that I kind of planned out in case nobody else had anything, does anybody else have anything they want to talk about? Any good, bad questions, comments?
I'll save mine for the end.
Oh, okay. Well, just some housekeeping stuff. Let me share my screen. There it is. So I had gotten this in the mail that HITRUST was having a couple of webinars. Oh, I'm still not sharing. It's a two-part process. There we go. HITRUST is having a couple of cybersecurity webinars coming up on the 18th. I don't know why these are flipped in there, but June 18th, the hidden cost of a weak third-party risk management system. And then map once, comply many. We used to be audit once, report many. And I don't know if they just can't live that dream. So, but this is, I guess mapping to different control frameworks and how, you can show compliance with the different ones. So thought it would be interesting if anybody had. And then there's always these that they have from past lessons. So if you ever are curious, it's HITRUSTalliance.net. And then if you come up here to events and training, it's under webinars.
Good. I am interested in that third party one, so I might join them.
Yeah. Yeah, they're usually really good. And they bring in different partners for this. I know Risk 360 is one of the partners they're bringing in for one of these two. I can't remember which one, but yeah, so they'll have a HITRUST person as well as usually a validated assessor to kind of bring both perspectives. So I will also make sure to watch some of these, and if there's some that should be called out, because I know one of the questions that we had for a future topic is, okay, so what happens after, if you are breached, if there is a security event and you have to report a breach and you have a HITRUST certification. And I know they had that under, gosh, where was it? They used to have, their podcast. And this was from, I think, last year, but they had one about, where was it? Rebuilding trust after the latest breach. So from May of last year, I know they had that. But if they do other events or webinars on that topic, and they even had from 2023, Trust versus AI, which would be curious to go back and see what their thought was in 2023 of AI versus what it looks like a year, 18 months later, a year and a half later. But that's always very helpful. And then we've got on LinkedIn, we've got our HITRUST, our Secrets to HITRUST Success group, where I try to post every week that we record these sessions. I put a post out on that group to kind of have it as a clearinghouse for people, if they do have questions and, say they come even 6 months from now and have questions about something, that there's a place that kind of collects all of that so they don't have to try to work through somebody's, posts of a bunch of different other things. So let me put as we start getting the conversation going, I'll put into the chat the link to that and as well as the link to the YouTube website.
Great.
So
very good.
Excellent. All right. So the other, Brian. Okay, cool. That's the hard part about being the host and doing the logistics and doing the talking at the same time. It's like, okay, can I click and talk at the same time? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Hey, Brian, how are you?
I'm good. Sorry to sneak in late.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
I just figured I'd quietly sit in the back and figure out what we were talking about.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
While you came in, good to meet you, Brian. I'm going to go on and eat my cookies. So there's
nothing to share, huh?
Not today. Sorry.
Gonna bring cookies for the rest of us. No, we were just talking, Brian, about there's a couple of upcoming webinars that HITRUST is leading about third-party risk management. And then, what was it? We'll go back to it. Map once, comply many. So
Hmm.
basically using it for being able to respond to different security frameworks. Um,
Okay.
so couple of things that I was interested in kind of getting people's perspectives is that I've been hearing a lot of CMMC, and that CMMC is going to be a really big player this year because any federal government contractor is going to need to go through a CMMC assessment this year by the end of 2025. What are you all hearing in that? And would there be a way to say, well, instead of CMMC, I've got HITRUST, and would that be an equivalent for the federal government? Does anybody have any perspective or input on that?
I would be
Well, I was
super.
going to ask a question. And Brian, are you somewhat of an expert on CMMC? Is anybody here an expert on CMMC? Wait, here's my question. HITRUST is so structured, right? And we love it because it's structured. But CMMC, on the other hand, is not structured at all. So when I look at the different levels, 1, 2, and 3, I see 15 and 110 and 134 controls or whatever it is. But again, they're very nebulous. They let you choose, those controls, while HITRUST is very structured. So I'm curious about the approach and everyone's thoughts on that. So
Well, we do have a CMMC practice, and Richard, unfortunately, is at a conference today. He actually leads our CMMC practice and our
Okay.
high trust practice at our firm. So there is absolutely an expert on this that is not me. Um, I personally would be very surprised to see the government say, "Nah, high trust is good enough." I mean, they're very kind of restrictive in their contract language and everything else, but certainly high trust, if it were mapped right, could be very, very valuable in making sure that those areas were met.
Okay. So we'll put it on, I'll put it on, making a note to put it on for an upcoming question and answer period when we've got Richard back.
Yeah, I
Because
think he
yeah,
would be
that's
great.
kind of where I'm hearing all the buzz, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, it's going to be way more important than people are going to be rushing to it. It's like the gold rush of compliance. It's like everybody who wants to do business with the federal government, and that's everybody, is going to have to do this. And I know we're still grappling with some of the new security rules. I've got some clients that are like, we need an annual pen test, and it's funny because that's one of the security rule requirements. But this group, they're a covered entity. They don't actually develop or host anything. They're just using off the shelf software or developed by somebody else, so software as a service type of environments. And they're like, what are you going to pen test? And I was like, well, still making sure that your network, you don't have insecure passwords and you can't do lateral movement and things like that. So I was like, yeah, it's going to be kind of a straightforward, I can't say simple or easy pen test, but it should be a pretty straightforward pen test, but there's still some requirements there.
That makes sense. That's yeah. CMMC is the one practice I'm not in, so
Okay.
I do a little with it, but Richard
Okay.
definitely has been very involved in it, and
Okay. Well, I will, like I said, I'll put that in as another thing. I'm putting in the chat, and then you'll see Donna's picture, but my my name, I've had to hijack her Zoom sessions because we can't be alternate hosts of each other. But you'll see that. So we've got everybody's LinkedIn sessions if we're not already linked together, and then the LinkedIn group HITRUST Secrets, as well as the YouTube channel, and so hopefully that'll work. But all right, so CMMC non-starter for this particular call today. One of the things that I was kind of just because I'm starting to look at forming what I want to say in that first HITRUST basics class. I know we talked about that last week, where I wanted to do a session just on an introductory to HITRUST assessments. And so I was like, well, not going to dive into the assessment handbook at the very beginning. I kind of want this first session to be general strategy. Why would you choose HITRUST over SOC 2 or CMMC and all that? And it started getting me thinking that, we've got a good group of people on here to kind of go through and share, as you're comfortable with sharing, your first experience with HITRUST. Like, what were you doing before you started doing HITRUST assessments? How was your organization proving compliance, or was it just not even, a thought beforehand, but kind of, looking at, what drew you to, okay, let's start this HITRUST voyage. And then from there, what were your first impressions of HITRUST as an assessment and versus an audit? Blake, you want to start?
Well, I doubt there's anything in my head that's not in yours about this, Susan.
Right, but that way I don't have to talk the whole time.
Fair enough.
And you were doing it before I got to. We both worked at Change Healthcare, so he was there long before I was.
Yeah, before that, certainly there was the lower bar of HIPAA, which is fairly nebulous. We had ENAC, which basically just used the HIPAA security and privacy requirements. So that was mainly lateral. And customer contracts, a bit of pressure here and there to sort of raise the game until HITRUST became a must. So there wasn't a big presence of the SOC 2 reports at that time just yet. That was still fairly minimal. So the level of rigor was really, if I recall correctly, coming a bit more from just customer contracts if they chose to get a bit more granular about certain things. So, and yeah, it was only a matter of time before the customer contracts finally made HITRUST a must, not some third party something giving us power of choice for third party due diligence. So, yeah, I'd certainly heard all the way back to 2010 that there's a lot of respect for the framework itself, but at that time it was a bit about who's going to take the plunge to do the certification. It's like a bunch of people standing side by side, kind of looking at each other to say
who's stepping out. Yeah.
who's going to be the first to step out. That might set things in motion, but yeah, those are some of my memories.
Okay.
And so, well, how did that go, Blake? Go ahead, Stephen. I'm fascinated by this conversation. So,
yeah. So from ours, some of our initial clients required either ISO 27001 certification or like blatantly HITRUST certification. And before this current role I'm in, I was an individual contributor, just having to deal with specific controls as opposed to the whole program. I was pretty floored with the amount of controls that we have to adhere to. I came on our first year of certification, probably like a month or two after the first certification, and then just kind of ran with it after that. The prescription of all of those controls, like do these specific things, was extremely helpful. I think to Jeff's point earlier, the nebulous, or maybe it was Blake, the nebulous nature of HIPAA, right? Like you could do so many things, right? But HITRUST, very, very specific.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Jeff, did you have a question for me?
Well, it was really more about that experience and how you were going through that and how people finally decided. So they're all standing there. Who takes that plunge? And what benefit do they get from plunging early, right?
Yeah, I can't really speak to what others did or did not. Can just kind of speak to what the company I worked for chose to. And it largely came down to customer had enough clout to turn it into a must. And because we grew by acquisition, had a fairly heterogeneous environment, but still largely a shared services model of infrastructure for the most part. So it's just an interesting thing because said big customer wanted HITRUST not just for present day, but should they choose to consume any of said company's services in the future? So it
Yeah.
kind of got to the powers that be. We're like, well, how else do we do this without making this an enterprise effort? So
Right.
that was
So
interesting to not even do a guinea pig. Hey, let's choose this easy environment that we can try to manage well, see what lessons are learned, and then do to and turn that into a phase two. And
yeah.
thanks to the wonderful leadership of the wonderful lady on the call.
Yeah, that was my fault. Because
Well, no,
we grappled with that. I mean, and that was because for me, I joined that organization as a new position doing high trust. So it was completely greenfield to be high trust compliant. And so that's why I was like, well, there had to have been some impetus before then, because the CISO, said it, hey, we need this. Prior to that, I'd been working in the financial industry, so I hadn't really had much in the way of healthcare technology experience. And so, um, I was kind of confused between HIPAA, high tech, high trust, and I remember talking to some people that were in healthcare technology and going, okay, what are your thoughts on this? Is this like a career limiting move for me, to go in 2016 to jump on and do this, focus just strictly on high trust? And some of the feedback I got was, yeah, well, at least it tells you what to do, versus kind of just leaving it up to you and going, well, maybe it'll be sufficient for OCR and maybe it won't. And how do you know? It's like the IRS all over again. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
well, just tell me how much I owe. And it's like, well, I'm not going to tell you how much you owe. I'm not going to tell you how to put these controls in. I'm not going to tell you exactly what controls to put in.
Although we
I'm just going to
know,
judge you,
although we
although we
know,
know
yeah.
what we want you to do, right? But I'm just going to judge you after the fact and tell you if it's good enough or not. And so I
Right.
think that's where High Trust kind of filled that void and said, okay, federal government, this is good enough, right? And kind of got the buy-in for that. That's where the question came up about CMMC versus High Trust, because I know
Right.
High Trust has that relationship with the government to be able to say, okay, this is sufficient, and kind of work through getting that to be an adopted standard.
Yes. But back to and then I'll be curious in a future conversation, because again, CMMC doesn't tell you what to do. So, and they think that it's a more secure framework. So more secure, it's a hard way to say, but or
Right.
a better way. I
A
don't know if
better
it is or not.
process or method.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it was funny. My first impressions of high trust when I got into the MyCSF was, kind of like what Blake was saying, we were looking at it going, okay, so do we do little islands, and then eventually those islands of certification become a continent, and eventually we get the entire enterprise? Or and that was before I understood, inheritance and how all that could work to our
Right.
advantage. So I was like, oh my gosh. And, kind of, the very first time you go through and that at that point, there was only the R2. So it was like, oh, well, we're playing in all of these states. So yeah, we're going to need this factor, and we're going to need this factor. And yeah, we should put FedRAMP in there, and we should, so we were putting like all of these things, and then, getting back, okay, you have well over 1,000 controls. It's like, okay, what do we need to be high trust certified? So backed back off of that, just to kind of go, okay, to have that certification to satisfy these customers. And some of these customers were on the board of high trust. So that's kind of also how that played into, of course they were going to say this was the way because they were on the board telling high trust,
Yeah.
we're going to
Of course.
we're
Yeah.
going to craft it this way. And of course, then they're going to go, well, yeah, now I want my business associates to work this way. So yeah, to Blake's point, there were a lot going, oh, who's actually going to try this? Because, what if you try and you fail, and who's, are they going to tell you, or is the board going to know? And so there was that
I
whole
just want to
thing
get
too.
one part straight. Were you acquired, or were you the business partner?
We were the business associate. So
Business associate. Sorry.
Yeah, we were the business associate, and then it was one of our clients, which was an insurance company, and their CISO sat on the high trust board. So was kind of, and so then of course they were coming when their contracts were renewing. Into Blake's point, they were using, you know, probably a half a dozen of our systems at that point, but
Yep.
they were like, but anything that you have, and so we were like, oh, sure, we'll get the whole organization HITRUST certified. And then it's like, oh, we don't certify the organization. We certify the systems that are running. And that's when we were kind of like, okay, well, how do we do this? We could be
Yeah.
years trying to get all of these systems individually certified with 500 or so controls. Or, do we just sweep it all? And of course, that was before HITRUST had the very granular um, uh, uh, indicators as far as scoring. So mostly compliant it didn't talk about like the level of implementation of the control over the scope of the systems. It was, well, if I've got this if the way I had put it to them, I said, well, if you take a sample, say I have 100 systems, and you take a sample of 20 of those, and you find it 75% of those systems that you take a sample of, it's still mostly compliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we were very fortunate that they were still doing sampling at the time.
Yes. Yeah. And that was true, that they could take a sample. So like all of those system controls, they would take a sample of the systems. It wasn't like it is now where it's every single system that's in scope. You have to look at those controls on every single system and then figure out, for this one control over these 5 systems, how much is implemented in each of these systems.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And we also did measured and managed because we knew where our gaps were. I mean, we had been studying this for a year, so we knew what needed to be done, and we had projects in place and things like that. So we were also relied on measured and managed to kind of boost those scores. And then HITRUST changed the rules to say, well, every measured and managed is going to be evaluated during QA process. Whereas before it was, if you can reasonably show, and so we did. But yeah, the scrutiny was second time around a lot more. So, I mean, they learned lessons, I think, from the way from the boundaries we pushed, as well as, we learned lessons on how to do it in a more efficient and to better protect the systems in their certifications. So a lot of learning that would happen between 2017 and 2021.
I'll bet.
And as far as the first impressions, yeah, the OCD part of my brain really liked the policy process, implemented, measured, managed, every data point, just very straightforward for every requirement. I'm like, okay, I can follow that. So I got sort of used to that. In fact, going off on a quick tangent, the first time I started dealing with the SOC stuff, it was very strange to me that now I'm the one who's supposed to figure out what controls actually satisfy the trust principles. They aren't being dictated to me. What's that about? I wasn't having used to that one layer of abstraction higher to kind of think through that. So caused my brain to shift gears to figure that out.
And what do you think today?
I still generally like the methodology, and I've been a bit removed. It was fun being Susan's sort of number 2 to some extent through that enterprise effort, but since then I'd sort of backed off to more just a stakeholder. So I had some awareness, but not nearly as involved as what was going on as year 1.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
So Brian, what was your first foray into HITRUST, and what were your impressions?
I don't think I'm particularly useful in this one. I was introduced to HITRUST as an assessor. I was already a SOC 2 assessor, and I was brought into the HITRUST team. So the choice was we needed more people that could do HITRUST assessments.
But the difference that you see, I mean, because I know I did a SOC 2 along with a HITRUST assessment, kind of the SOC 2 was for the data center, and the HITRUST assessment was for the system that ran in that data center. And it was because we were contractually obligated to have a SOC 2 for the data center. So I worked with 2 separate teams from the same organization, from the same accounting organization. But what were your thoughts kind of coming into it? And do you like the structure, or do you kind of more like having that your own kind of take on it?
Well, I can deliver about 20 different frameworks, assessments, and audits and certifications, and I focus as much as I can on HITRUST.
Okay.
I'm a big advocate for it. I like it. The cost is always a little daunting, and I wish it wasn't 5 times as much as a SOC 2 audit. Um, but I I push it a lot. When I get people that speak to me, they're like, "We need something. What should we do?" If it fits,
Hmm.
I like HITRUST, and it's very much my favorite. Mostly for me because I know that everybody that's assessing it is going through the QA process at HITRUST. And I know
Hmm.
some other, say this very carefully, some other frameworks are not necessarily as diligent with some assessors as they should be. And those assessors are not able to issue a HITRUST report of questionable quality.
Hmm.
So I like that. And just personally, my least favorite part of auditing is report writing. And
Oh,
so in the
you're like, it does
HITRUST
it for me.
world, HITRUST does it for me. Um, and I don't typically like the more prescriptive frameworks. I do PCI, I don't like it. It's yes or
Mm.
no, I don't like that. So I like HITRUST kind of position in the middle of we're going to tell you more of what you need to do, but we're not going to make you do it exactly this way, the way some of the more prescriptive frameworks do. So I think it's a good balance of that. And I think the QA is a great quality checkpoint. I'm also a fractional CISO, and I know if I get a HITRUST report, I don't have to spend the time looking at it that I have to spend looking at some other reports, making sure they were done diligently and thoroughly. And I mean, you leave controls that you I would be looking for as a CISO off other frameworks, and there's no way to do that because HITRUST is so fussy about, you know what, that is applicable. You have to test it. Um,
Hmm.
so, so I enjoy it. I mean, it was a little daunting to start because it was a whole new process, and my CSF is not my favorite tool.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's not the first time I heard that.
But it's gotten better through the years. It's absolutely gotten better through the years.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I do like the reporting, even as you're going through the assessment, some of the reports that you can get along the way to kind of take your temperature and see where you are. Where some of the other ones, it's like, well, how do you keep straight that, okay, this part's done and I don't have to think about it again versus this, which I started kind of getting the evidence, but I don't really know kind of, do I have it enough and things like that. And it's, for my CSF, it's, the way I use it is if I have all the evidence, I score it 100%. If I don't have all the evidence, I always score it 25 or 50%, just so it tags it on a report for me to go, oh, why is that yellow? Oh, that's right, because I'm still waiting for this evidence. So it helps me kind of be efficient as far as, where am I in the assessment? Whereas I'm doing like just a HIPAA assessment and it's like, okay, where are we? And you're like, okay, well, it's not a full audit. I'm not doing a full HIPAA audit. I'm just kind of doing a readiness, like what parts of HIPAA or it's difficult for me to go, okay, yeah, where are we, with this? So having that my CSF interface, it to me is very helpful.
I do enough other assessments to stay relevant and current in them, but my focus and my preference is very much HITRUST.
Okay,
I,
cool.
I, I appreciate the perspective. So it's actually what I've been looking for. So thanks, Brian.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and that's why I asked the question today, because like I said, when I'm starting this HITRUST Basics series, I just kind of want, people to go, instead of being 3 sessions in to then go, oh, this really isn't what I need or what I'm looking for, or what would fit the business case. So that's why I wanted to kind of see, okay, what are the business cases? Because typically what I tell people, if they're a covered entity, chances are they just need HIPAA. They don't necessarily need to go HITRUST, because a lot of times they're not developing software, they're not hosting an environment, they're using somebody else's and storing their information there. So they just need to know their third parties are sound, their practices are sound, people are trained, and they've got some physical, basic building blocks. If they're globally focused, I tell them most likely you're going to want ISO 27001, and very similar to HITRUST, but more widely recognized outside of the US. And then, if you're a business associate, or if you've got a contractual requirement, at that point, that's when HITRUST is important. But it's important to keep in mind, like an E1 or an I1, you need to add the HIPAA controls if you're healthcare, because it doesn't come, those 44 controls are not covering all of HIPAA.
What I've noticed in a lot of cases, people come to me with HIPAA in mind, and they end up pivoting to HITRUST because they come to me with the question of how do I get HIPAA certified? And
Right.
I get to say, you don't get HIPAA
There's
certified,
nothing,
and
yeah,
anybody who is claiming to be HIPAA certified is lying to you. There is no
exactly.
certificate.
Right.
So then it's because they're getting kind of maybe the sales push. We want to use certified on our website. We want to tell our clients we're certified. How do we get certified? And that's where HITRUST becomes kind of the
Right.
natural
It's
flow,
ISO or
even if it's
HITRUST. Yeah.
not, yeah. CSA star.
Yes. Oh, that's true. Yeah.
But
If
yeah,
they're cloud hosted, right? Because if they're
yeah.
on-prem, that you can't use that.
But that's in addition to the ISO. You can't do that without the ISO. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So, a lot of times that's where it falls apart because the initial question when they reach out to me is that we want to be HIPAA certified. And I'm like, I can give you an attestation. You could be HIPAA tested. Like,
Right.
but we don't want to say that. We want to say we're HIPAA certified. I'm like, I can't give
Yeah.
you
There's
that.
no, you can say we're HIPAA compliant, that
But
we,
anybody can
we
say
could,
that.
Yeah.
well, I mean, but that you've proved it through an audit, through a third
That's
party.
true.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that's where it's kind of like back to that same old thing with the IRS, I want the IRS to certify my tax return. Well, they're not going to.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just have to 7 years to kind of run cover until okay, that must have been okay because I didn't get audited.
So the high trust is kind of very natural there when people do have either an executive, the board is getting more kind of security
Mhm.
aware and they want to know, are we certified? And then they like the word certified.
Right. Or how secure are we? Yes.
Hmm.
And you're like, today at this time,
So that's another of my
90%.
favorites with high trust is it is congratulations. It's nice to send somebody that says congratulations, you are certified.
Right.
Like at the end of well, congratulations, here's your SOC 2 attestation. Doesn't
And
have the same, you are certified.
well, especially because the nomenclature they use is it's non-qualified. And you're like,
Mhm.
is that good or bad?
It is an
Have a
unqualified opinion,
non-qualified
yes.
report. I'm like, okay, but that's accounting for you. I never really understood the concepts of accounting and the terminology. I was like, that doesn't sound like you said. I mean, that's not a resounding, we have a non-qualified audit.
Well,
But
I've actually been using the term unqualified opinion,
Right.
frequently these
Right.
days.
it's
But is it
what
because you're not qualified, or is it because you're
what I finally came to understand because I struggled with this as an assessor and how to explain it is the except for is where the qualified comes in. You're all good except for this little qualification. But
right?
it's hard to explain to people because I tell them, you're gonna get a qualified report, and they're like, oh, good.
Yeah,
No,
exactly.
no,
Right. You're like, no, that's
that's
not a
not
good thing.
great.
Yep. Yeah,
No,
maybe
it's
it should be like exceptions or something like that. A no exception report or
Yeah,
something, as
well, no,
opposed to
exceptional. You got an exceptional report then. Be
right.
careful.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's the negative connotation of qualified, like saying, "Hey, you're pretty smart for an American."
Yeah, that's true. Yep. But I trust you're, certified or not, and people like that checkbox, especially when you get up to the board that doesn't have time to be in the weeds.
Hmm. Makes sense. Well, I think we lost Steven because I was going to ask him. Oh yeah, he had to hop
He
off.
said he had to hop off. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, because one of the things that I was going to ask and is for the whole supply chain, because I know that was some of these webinars that they're talking about third party risk management and all of that. And it's one thing to, to say, okay, I'm a covered entity, or I'm a large business associate, and I want to make sure the vendors that I'm using and relying on are um, using and following these controls. So I've made a contract with my business associate through my business associate agreement. But does anybody ever go like to the next level to say, okay, well, now I want to scrutinize who you do business with and make sure you have that? I mean, does that ever come up in conversation, or is it really just, well, I won't ask and they should be okay? So the full supply chain.
Well, when
I
you
don't know
say
the answer to
full
that.
supply chain, do you mean upstream, what's coming into the environment versus downstream, what are subcontractors?
Subcontractors is really what I'm looking at. So like AWS, we've got an associate agreement with AWS, but do we ever go to AWS and say, okay, well, now let me see your contracts and your agreements with who you're subcontracting to?
Hmm.
Or do we just
Well,
go, well, we've covered ourselves?
from all
Well,
the time I spent
technically,
with go ahead, Jeff.
I was going to probably go where you're going. So, technically, the contract is between the two parties, not the um, third party entity. So there should be another contract that supports that. But that said, it depends on what your contract says, right? So your contract could, read that there is that they cannot do such a thing. So
Right. And I know that's
Yeah.
one of the things the HITRUST has now in their
right.
controls is it talks about the full supply chain. And so I'm just kind of curious, do you just rely on, okay, well, I've made a legal contract with Microsoft or AWS or Google, and therefore I'm going to trust that they've made that sufficient contract because it says in mine that they have to do this or they should be doing this. Am I ever going to follow up and go, well, are you doing this? Because I mean, it's hard enough. I think it's hard enough to track your own vendor management
Yeah.
and your own procurement, especially from an information security standpoint, because what I hear from most people is, well, it's hard for procurement to even remember to let us know that they've hired a new vendor or they've brought somebody new on board. So that's where I'm like, okay, well, you talk about chasing your own tail, to then have to go to your bigger suppliers and say, okay, well, now how are you keeping everything safe? Or is there some that you do? There's some that are like, well, this is just mission critical and I need to make sure, all up and down, whether it's maybe clinical technology or something, is there any way there? Or are you just going, well, buying this from you, and it says in the contract you're being secure and you're making sure your others are secure, so I'm just going to trust it.
You
Yeah,
want to say something, Blake? Go for it. Come on.
well, just with my memory of things. So, I mean, the most extreme would be just to categorically forbid your 1 degree of separation subcontractor from doing anything, or then you can play the game of you want permission, or in the absence of permission, you at least want to be notified. But arguably, the most feasible thing to do that you alluded to, Susan, is just you put in the flow down language saying, okay, if you subcontractor in turn choose to further subcontract, you need provisions in the contract that are as
Right.
stringent as. So, but yeah, as far as checking on it, then we're kind of back to, I think, as Jeff said, because the contract is just between the two parties, the entity you're dealing with would likely say no, they're just not permitted to.
Yeah. Well, it's just for me, because like I said, knowing that HITRUST has that language about, protect the entire supply chain, I'm like, well, okay, but as the assessed entity, how do I prove that other than, well, it's in the contract that says they should be doing this, and that was kind of my question: is HITRUST going to come back to go, okay, well, how did you prove that they were doing it? And do I try to do that, or even in, like I said, the most critical technology, because there's some vendors that you're like, okay, I try, like Salesforce, some of the big names you're going to be like, oh, well, obviously they're going to have the same controls in place because, for them to be breached is going to be major. But for some of these smaller players, your MSP or, your second tier help desk support, are you really going to go to that level with them.
I guess I'd like to ask a question, I suppose, because what's going through my mind as you're talking about all that is insurance claims and lawsuits. So I think that if my organization were to be breached for whatever reason, I would be naming everybody that I possibly could in that lawsuit, right? So I'd be finding those downstream folks, regardless of the contract that has been signed between the two organizations, and pursue that. So, did that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, even looking at like how we started this conversation at the top of the call, that one of the people that I invited to this call uses Firefly's AI for note taking.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't done any due diligence on that, so am I going to kick Firefly's AI out? Have I agreed as, say I'm that covered entity, and the contractor of my contractor is using that, have they vetted it? Or, and so that's kind of where this comes in, and you're like, well, yeah, I mean, how far down that
How deep does it
rabbit
go?
hole do you go? And how much is HITRUST expecting you to do that when you say, yeah, I've secured the supply chain?
That's a fascinating question.
It's a stumper.
Or is it
Well,
another level of rigor? Like I think, is it the New York
right.
State law, the DFS, that yes, you have the contract, but then entities have to actively attest to say, I have done
Right.
this all year, rather than just assume that silence from because you
Right.
didn't report anything. Does that mean everything was fine?
Right. Yeah. And some of these, oh, go ahead.
From the assessor standpoint, is there should be kind of a cascade of that. If you've assessed your vendors and you've looked at their SOC 2 report, their SOC 2 assessor should have looked at their vendor management process, and they either got a questionnaire or got an audit report from their vendors, and that should keep going. In theory, at some point, somebody won't have a report or won't pass a questionnaire if they haven't assessed their vendors. So that's, from the assessor standpoint, that's how that should keep working. Is if you've handled your client's vendor assessment process, they've assessed each of their vendors, then they've assessed that each of their vendors are doing what they're supposed to do. And part of what those vendors are supposed to do is assess their vendors and their providers.
Mm-hmm.
I generally believe that big or enterprise organizations try to do the right thing, right? I get worried with the SMBs, because that supply chain does get small pretty quickly, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where it starts with, okay, well, first look at the criticality of what it is that you're protecting. And so, focus on the covered information and those vendors that are storing, processing, transmitting, or in some way, shape, or form have access to. But to your point, somebody brings in a virtual assistant, that note taker that, does the CISO know that at such and such organization that's happened? Is there going to be a SOC 2? You kind of look at that and go, well, that could have been the impetus behind, whatever this breach was. But how do I have time in my day to even focus on my first tier vendors, never mind subcontractors that they may have, and further in. But here I am attesting to HITRUST. Yeah, to the best of my ability. And I was like, well, maybe that's how you do it. Is like, well, can I really chase down that one person, sitting remote on a secondary help desk team that's using an insecure note taker?
Yeah, right. Well, I don't want to get us too far off of course, but I had some cameras in my house from, I think it was GE. I forget. Anyway, it was GE's label. Somebody else made it. All of those cameras, I just got a note saying unavailable software. Anyway, it was hacked dead.
True.
I don't know what they saw, but whoever probably saw it inside my house for quite a bit, right? So
Wow.
those things happen.
Yep. I know it's funny. I have a friend that does security cameras for a living. And for the most part, it's for, like stores or retail, so that they can
Yeah.
kind of make sure. The way he describes it is, I want to catch people doing the right thing so that you can reward them. And, and then also you have that to fall back on if you catch somebody doing the wrong thing, and all. But it's funny because he has a vacation home that he just started letting out through Airbnb. And I kept thinking, gosh, I wonder how many cameras he's got in that home that are alerting him to, oh, somebody opened the front door. And, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I'd feel safe, to be like, hi, going
Yeah.
into the
I'm
kitchen, huh? I don't
pretty
know where the
sure
camera is, but
they semi-recently outlawed it, I think. Not
okay, good.
positive.
Indoors, but not
Yeah.
outdoors. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
true. That would be good, hopefully. But yeah, I always worry about that, when you're renting somebody else's house, that you're like, how much are they seeing?
Yep. I do need to jump a minute early, but I
Okay.
really
Yeah, I
enjoyed the
think we wrapped up.
conversation. So thanks. Brian, it was great to meet you today. And Blake, great to see you.
You
Yeah,
too,
it's good to
Jeff.
meet you too, Jeff.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right. We'll see ya. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you got value from this episode, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next HITRUST Secrets. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central and dig into real-world compliance and security topics. And each session gets uploaded right here after the live show. So whether you're catching us live or on your own time, make sure you're subscribed. We'd love to have you along on your HITRUST journey.